Urgent, why your quantum shift stalled at 87%, discover the hidden key. If your shift stalled at 87%, stop scrolling and listen. You are not broken. You are not lazy or spiritually insufficient or destined to repeat the same half-completed revolution forever. You are exactly where millions of seekers find themselves, advanced enough that techniques, practices, and knowledge carry you very far, but still missing the last decisive vibration that completes the whole. This message is the missing transmission. It's not another practice to add to your routine, nor is it a checklist you must finish. It is a frequency that, when registered, allows the system you are, body, field, nervous system, patterning, to finish reorganizing itself. In plain language, you did the work. You arrived at 87%. The last 13% waits not for more doing, but for recognition, reception, and alignment with a transmission that reorganizes coherence from the inside out. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want to keep receiving content like this. It takes less than a second and helps support the work we're doing here. Now, before I explain what that transmission looks like and how you can recognize its arrival, I want to validate what you've likely been feeling. These are the signals of being stalled at 87%, the markers that haunt you at 2 a.m., that show up in the middle of a meditation or in a conversation where you can almost touch the next level, and then it slips away. You might recognize one, two, or all of these. You oscillate between states. One day you feel close to a new reality, luminous, sure, decisive, and the next day you fall back into the old loop, old thinking, old fatigue, the same stalled projects. It's not random, it's the system trying on coherence and retracting because the stabilizing code hasn't fully written. Synchronicities arrive but don't culminate. The universe seems to arrange coincidences around you. Doors open, people appear, hints fall into place, but nothing solidifies. The threads are there, but they won't weave. You keep being led to thresholds that never open. You possess knowledge without embodiment. You've read the books, done the practices, can speak the language of transformation, yet your body, your habits, your emotional reflexes do not reflect it. You can describe the peace you seek, but cannot sustain it in the face of old triggers, chronic exhaustion not cured by rest. You may sleep and still wake tired, as if your energy signature is trying to rewire but never completes the bridge. It's not laziness, it's energy stalled in transit. Relationships in limbo. Your closest ties, romantic, familial, professional, feel suspended. You move closer to a new way of being, and the people around you either hold you at bay or mirror your half-finished state. Decisions that should be clear remain fogged, a pervasive sense of waiting. You live like someone who has been handed the map but can't yet enter the territory. You sense arrival is imminent but remain perched on the threshold, uncertain whether to step forward. If this list lands with you, you are seeing the classic geometry of 87%, enough development to be painfully aware of what's missing, but not yet arrived in completion. I want to underscore something vital here. This is not your failure. You were not meant to do it all alone. Many of the deepest reorganizations in nature require a handshake, not a solo climb. In language terms, study gets you to competence. Immersion, the living presence of fluent speakers, gives you accentless fluidity. You have studied. You now require immersion. Here's the single, small, powerful action you can take right now, if this resonates. In the comments below, or in a place you can see later, simply write the 2 words, recognition complete. This is not a gimmick. When you publicly register recognition, you are participating in morphic propagation, a resonant gesture that supports the field-level repatterning that helps these transmissions settle more readily. Do it if it feels aligned. No pressure. Leave it only if you really feel called. This is the one simple, low-effort registration that strengthens the collective wave without binding you to any doctrine. Now let's map the mechanism beneath the experience so you can see why the final 13% resists typical tools. Imagine coherence as a threshold inside a complex operating system. Not computer hardware, but the living operating system you carry, the brain-heart-mind-body field matrix. Up to a certain point, repetitive practices, breathwork, meditation, somatic release, therapy, study, act like updating patches. They debug old code, they replace brittle modules, they scaffold new routines. This process reliably takes most seekers very far. It gets you to a high-functioning, repatterned version of your old self. That's the 87%. The last 13% is different. It is not incremental patching. It is a phase transition. In physics, phase transitions happen quickly when a system crosses a coherence threshold. Water goes from liquid to vapor, magnetization snaps into order, an entire lattice aligns, and the system acquires new properties overnight. In the language of lived experience, you can live a long time with tiny oscillations. Then, with the right input, the whole field snaps into a new geometry. What is that input? It is a transmission, a precise frequency, a field handshake, a recognition that aligns scattered subsystems into a coherent attractor. Think of it as a resonant key that doesn't teach you new facts. It resynchronizes what you already know into living presence. It's the difference between memorizing a language and being kissed by its cadence until you dream and think and joke in it. Some researchers have offered metaphors that help illustrate parts of this. There are interpretive readings of work by people like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose that suggest microtubules inside neurons could play roles in quantum coherent processes in living tissue. Thinkers like Seth Lloyd have written about information processing at fundamental levels. John Joe McFadden has proposed ideas about quantum processes in biology. I cite these not to claim settled proof, but to provide an interpretive bridge. Imagine parts of your cellular architecture as potential players in a larger coherence dance. Use these models like maps, not gospel. They invite a plausible image that the body is not only biochemical, but also electromagnetic and informational. That coherence at subtler scales can influence gross patterns of behavior and experience. Now picture decoherence as the friction that stops the handshake. Decoherence is when parts of a system fall out of phase. The nervous system's rhythms, the heart's electromagnetic presence, the gut-brain signaling, your social field, all slightly misaligned. Practices reduce noise, they tune individual oscillators. But without a coherent external phase to lock to, those oscillators can remain out of sync with one another. The transmission functions as an external reference oscillator that locks the internal ones, allowing the whole organism to snap into a new mode of operation. Why doesn't another technique finish it? Because techniques, even potent ones, primarily change local variables. They strengthen the muscles of attention, shift neural pathways, and alter chemicals. But the final reorganization is systemic. It's like giving someone a grammar book, it helps, but to speak the language fluently, you must be bathed in the accent of a native. The transmission is immersion, a frequency pattern that does not teach you more grammar, but rescales your entire system so the grammar becomes natural. You may also hear me describe this with an operating system analogy. Imagine your field as a distributed network of nodes: mind, soma, heart, relationships, biofield. For weeks or years you have been installing updates: better sleep, clearer boundaries, more mindful eating, study, rituals. Each update improves one node, but the network still lacks a synchronized kernel that allows the nodes to communicate with low-latency coherence. The transmission loads that kernel. Once loaded, the nodes speak the same protocol. Processes that were asynchronous become synchronous, and whole new capacities emerge simply because information flows without bottleneck. This is where the phrase coherence-decoherence threshold matters. It is not mystical slang, it's a functional description of qualitative systemic change. The threshold feels like an edge. On one side, incremental effort helps but encounters resistance. On the other, reception suffices to cause global reorganization. You might reasonably ask, all right, but how does this show up in living experience? Here, let me turn personal. I know these states not only as theory, but because I lived the slow tidal grind, and then the sudden snap. For 2 years, I lived in that 87% geometry. I studied sound signatures, I practiced several daily disciplines, I followed teachers, I tracked my sleep cycles, and I kept a notebook of almost moments. I could feel the blade of completion shimmering within reach, and yet it would not cut. I remember the oscillation vividly, mornings when everything felt aligned, and evenings when my posture, my breath, my patience collapsed into a decade-old pattern. The waiting became its own identity, a kind of second skin. My closest relationships reflected that in odd ways. Conversations that should have moved toward clarity derailed into tests of my old reactivity. Opportunities would flash in my periphery like distant lighthouses and then vanish when I approached. Then I traveled to a gathering because a friend insisted, not a crowd, but a small cluster of people who were known by reputation and by felt presence to embody a completed coherence. I was skeptical. After all, I had been trained to be self-sufficient, to account for my own results. But on that afternoon, the room held a different charge. There was one person in particular, not loud, not performative, simply present. She moved in ways that felt less like behavior and more like a field pattern. When she entered a space, things rearranged around her. Conversations shortened, decisions clarified. People around her breathed differently, as if an invisible metronome aligned their rhythms. I sat near her on a bench in the garden. There was no instruction, no agenda. We did not trade secrets. She was not offering a course. She was simply there. I had practiced for years, yet in the silence of proximity something shifted. It began as a whisper in my jawline, a small loosening, then a wave of warmth behind my sternum. Time, which I had always felt as a linear chain of tasks, thinned and then, astonishingly, expanded. It was not that minutes stretched. Rather, the density of experience changed. Events layered in a way that made cause and effect clearer, immediate. My breath deepened on its own. A mental knot I had been pulling at for months dissolved like sugar in hot tea. I told myself it was imagination. I walked away thinking, that felt nice, but how lasting? For the next 2 days I tested it like a scientist and like a cautious pilgrim. The jump lasted. The oscillation stopped. Synchronicities I had been tracking began to resolve, not all at once, but in a way that had a new logic to it. Decisions that had been fogged became crisp. It was not mystical fireworks. It was a quieter realignment that rendered certain old responses obsolete. There are 3 points to notice in that story. 1. The shift did not come from that person's teaching. She didn't instruct. She simply embodied. 2. My prior practices made me able to register the transmission. If I had not been ready, if I had been at 40% or 60%, the energetic handshake would likely have passed through without effect. Practice prepared the substrate. Reception completed the process. 3. The transmission acted like a field-level organizer, not as a magic pill. It rearranged coherences that were already present, but unjoined. At this point you may be wondering about symptoms you should watch for when the transmission actually arrives. I will enumerate those in detail soon, because recognizing completion matters as much as receiving it. Many people receive partial activations and then dismiss them because they don't match the fireworks they expected. Completion often arrives as subtle, persistent shifts. a damping of inner noise, a reordering of priorities, a deepening of presence that resists old triggers. It can also have somatic correlates: vibration in the spine, shifts in temperature, a sudden clarity like a tightening lens. But none of these sensations are required proofs. They are possible confirmations. Before I go further into the signs and into the practical ways to amplify your receptivity, let's examine a critical boundary most people miss: the difference between transmission that triggers an instantaneous reorganization and a series of techniques that, cumulatively, may appear to do the same. Techniques are local interventions. They change rates and patterns in parts of the system. A breath practice can lower cortisol, a movement routine can open fascia, a therapy series can rewire attachment patterns. These are essential. But the transmission I speak of is a system-wide resynchronizer. It's not about changing one node, it's about aligning many nodes so that an entirely new attractor state becomes stable. You can think of it like a choir. Techniques teach individual singers their notes. Transmission turns the choir from a collection of soloists into a single living organism that breathes together and produces harmonics no individual could achieve alone. Why do many spiritual systems have proximity-based initiation rituals, lineage immersions, or hands-on blessings? Because the phenomenon I'm describing is ancient. Traditions encoded practices that allowed for direct field-based repatterning. Initiations, rites, sangha immersion, guru presence. Modern spiritual entrepreneurship repackages these as courses and programs, which are often excellent, but there's a difference between a well-constructed course and real-time immersion in a coherent field. The former teaches, the latter calibrates. I must also make a practical caveat. Not every charismatic presence is a transmission. You can be emotionally moved without true alignment. Character and intention matter. The transmission we are talking about is subtle and often humble. It carries no pressure, no demand. Its effect is to settle, not to agitate. So use discernment. Your past pain may make you fall for dramatic displays. This is not that. The field that completes systems tends to be stabilizing, centering, and oddly ordinary in appearance. Think of it like an underground river, invisible on the surface, but powerful enough to alter the course of nearby streams. If you're still with me, you're probably asking, can this be accelerated? Can you increase your receptivity so the arrival of transmission is more likely? The short answer is yes, but not by chasing more techniques. Receptivity is increased primarily through two vectors: readiness and registration. Readiness is what your practices have built: nervous system regulation, clear intentioning, boundary stabilization, and a certain integrity in how you live your day-to-day. Registration is the act of acknowledging and anchoring the reception when it happens. Small, simple practices that embed the received frequency into your body and social field. In the practical portion that follows, I'll walk you through concrete micro-rituals that help registration, simple breath anchors, micro-embodiment protocols, and social registration gestures that help propagate morphic alignment. But before we do that, it's important to clear a conceptual obstacle that often trips people up: the temptation to make the transmission into a thing you can selfishly grab. Some seekers hear transmission and assume it's a scarce good, something to be hoarded or obtained by manipulation. This misses the nature of the phenomenon. A transmission is a frequency that is amplified by service and recognition. When it's received and recognized publicly or socially, it is more stable in the field. It becomes part of the collective attractor and thus easier for others to access. That is why simple public registrations, like commenting "recognition complete," are not superstition. They are practical interventions that strengthen the morphic wave. The key is that this is an invitation, not a coercion. The window to receive may be helpful now, and yet it is not a punitive deadline. It is an energetic opening that favors those who both prepare and resonate with it. I want to pause here to name a fidelity rule I follow in my guidance. I will not promise guaranteed physical miracles, quick riches, or medical cures. I will not suggest that a transmission solves every problem on your legal, financial, or medical ledger. What it does reliably do, based on patterns I've seen in myself and in others, is reorganize coherence so decisions become clearer, patterns simplify, energy flows more smoothly, and relationships either resolve or become honest about their next steps. Those outcomes are powerful and often felt as life-changing, but they are not theatrical guarantees. Back to our map. We have covered the signs of 87%, the difference between practice and transmission, the interpretive science that helps us imagine micro and macro coherence, and the fact that proximity to a fully shifted field can catalyze the final phase. We have also begun my personal story of arriving at completion through proximity. This is where I will slow down and give space, because the next segment, the exact texture of activation and the checklist of 8 unmistakable outcomes, requires careful listening. The body needs room to register what you hear next. If you are taking notes, know that the activation descriptions that follow are meant to be attended to as options, not obligations. You may experience one, several, or none of them, and any combination is valid. For now, hold the image of that bench in the garden. Hold the warmth behind the sternum and the thinning of time. Hold the knowledge that you were prepared by years of practice to register that field when it arrived. And hold the recognition that the final 13% is a handshake, not a homework assignment. We are about to step into the precise language of what completion feels like and how it reorganizes your life. The 8 outcomes you can watch for, the subtle somatic signatures of reception, and the ritual gestures that help stabilize the frequency once it's felt. We will also discuss the collective window that makes this moment particularly fertile and the responsible ways to share this transmission with others without draining or commodifying it. But before I go on, I want to make something else clear. If you have been trying to force arrival by doing more of the same and feel only frustration, that frustration is itself a signal that your methods are mismatched to this phase. The last work is often less work and more unfastening. It asks for less striving and more receiving. Let this be permission. You can stop trying harder in the old ways and instead prepare the field that will let reception land. Now breathe with me briefly. Notice the breath, not to fix anything, but simply to notice. Feel the chest expand, let the exhale be full. Feel where tension lives in the body. This simple attention is not a practice that will complete you. It is a readiness act that helps attune you to the next input. When a field arrives, it will use this kind of attention as a docking port. I will return in a moment with the specific activation sensations, the 8 unmistakable post-completion markers, and practical, low-effort rituals that help you register and sustain the shift. But before I continue, take the time to check in. Does the list of signs still feel like your map? If so, remember that the small public registration, write "Recognition Complete" if you feel called, is an optional but powerful alignment tool. If you did it, keep it simple and move on. If you didn't, no harm. Either way, be gentle with yourself. You are not failing. You are on a precise edge that many before you have crossed once they stopped doing and started receiving. What follows next will describe the textures of completion, the subtle somatic signatures, the mental reorganizations that feel like a lens snapping into place, and the 8 concrete ways your life reshapes after the final code downloads. We will also explore the ethical and practical considerations of proximity-based transmission, how to steward it, how to share it responsibly, and how to recognize true coherence in others. This is where the mechanics meet the moral, how to honor the field while you enter it. Hold your posture, keep the breath easy, prepare for descriptions that may land differently than you expect. The next section, will help you form a vocabulary for what you will taste when the final 13% arrives, and will give you short rituals you can use immediately to support registration. Now we describe the textures, the exact language you can use to recognize completion when it arrives, because naming the phenomenon helps it land. Listen to these descriptions as possibilities, not rules. Imagine them as a palette of sensations. You may feel one color strongly, another only faintly, and some not at all. That variability is normal. Completion does not insist on uniformity. It only asks for honest noticing. The first texture is a deep internal simplification. You have known complexity, competing wants, layered intentions, mental negotiations that used to feel endless. Completion often arrives as a sudden downshift of that internal chatter. Thoughts do not stop entirely, but their urgency softens. Decisions that once required circular debates begin to resolve quickly. Where you once weighed dozens of angles, you now sense a clearer axis. It is like a house whose many rooms have been put back into a single luminous corridor. You still have rooms, but the path through them is obvious. The second texture is somatic recentering. This is subtle for many. A felt settling into the spine, a softening behind the sternum, a realignment of breath that does not require effort. You might notice that your habitual clench around the jaw unhooks for no apparent reason, or you might feel a gentle warmth moving along the midline. Not fever, not pathology, but an internal retuning that feels like a metronome finding its groove. These sensations are often brief at first and then persist. They act as anchors, bodily evidence that a coherence has taken hold. The third texture is temporal repatterning. Time changes, not as a dramatic sci-fi dilation, but as a resensing of density. Moments feel more informative. Causality tightens. You remember fewer irrelevant details and retain more of what matters. Where you used to experience life as a stream of separate incidents, you begin to see patterns and trajectories earlier. This is not merely better planning, it is an experiential intelligence that recognizes meaningful next steps with less friction. The fourth texture is the soft dissolution of reactive triggers. Triggers do not vanish like magic smoke. Instead, you find that when an old pattern arises, it resolves faster, with less internal drama. You may still feel the raw edge, but the return to center happens sooner, as if the system includes a quicker, self-correcting loop. People who know you may notice you rebound differently. Those who used to be able to push your buttons suddenly find the buttons are less adhesive. The fifth texture is relational amplification. Your presence begins to affect others in small, measurable ways. Not always grand conversions, more often gentle calibrations. Conversations take on a clarity they lacked. People lean in. Decisions that used to loop around theatrical resistance now arrive more quickly. This does not mean you control others. Rather, your coherence becomes a context that invites clarity. You will notice this most when those closest to you behave as if something about the tone of the room has shifted. The sixth texture is a felt ease with manifestation logic. Synchronicities stop being tantalizing hints and begin to read like a language. You may experience strings of helpful coincidences that feel coherently ordered, not random. Projects find their right timing. Opportunities that previously dissipated now have a way of resolving. Importantly, this is not about guaranteed outcomes. It is about a higher ratio of alignment to noise. You notice fewer false leads and more pathways that culminate. The seventh texture is a resourcing of attention. Your attention is no longer dragged by every novelty. You become selective in a way that feels effortless. This is not about control. It is about fidelity. You find you can invest energy without burning the edges of your system. The work you do tends to land with more economy and less wasted motion. The eighth texture is a quiet enlargement of meaning. The things you already loved deepen in resonance. Work that once felt grindy can feel clarified. Relationships you stewarded from habit become alive with new quality. This is not a promise of comfort in all things. It's an invitation to found your life on a center that carries sustained tone. All of the above can emerge in combinations and in different tempos. Some people report a single catalytic sensation that then radiates. Others experience a sequential settling that takes days or weeks. None of these patterns is superior to another. Completion is not a one-size-fits-all script. It is a reconfiguration that respects your individual architecture. Let me give you a more granular inventory of possible activation sensations, because people often dismiss partial signs. If you notice one or more of the following, attend to them kindly. They may be invitations to register and anchor, a warmth or subtle vibration along the spine, especially in the upper thoracic or cervical regions, that is calm rather than agitated. A brief, crisp clarity in thought where confusion recedes, and the next right step appears with an ease that surprises you. A soft expansion behind the breastbone, a sense of spacing where constriction once lived. Micro tremors or tingles in the hands or scalp that dissipate into an ongoing steadiness. A felt reordering in the stomach region, less knotting, more visceral trust in decisions. A sudden recollection or intuitive satisfaction that aligns several loose threads in your life story. Time feeling thicker in the present, actions appearing to have more leverage than before. Reduced need to ruminate about certain past hurts, not because they are erased, but because they no longer command the foreground. If any of these land, do not rush to prove them. Pause. Notice without analysis. Recognize rather than interpret. Recognition is the docking mechanism. Doubt is often the disruptive oscillation that unmoors the registration before it anchors. Which brings us to registration practices. These are short, low-friction gestures you can use immediately to help the transmission stabilize in your system once it arrives. They are not rituals to force something unknown. They are practical acts that convert ephemeral sensation into embodied pattern. Use what feels fitting. Discard what feels like performance. The point is to make the reception persistent. First, ground and name. When you notice any activation sensation, place a hand on your sternum and a hand on your lower belly. Feel the subtle temperature differences. Breathe slowly for 5 cycles in a way that lets the exhale last slightly longer than the inhale. As you exhale, name aloud one word that summarizes the felt shift. Settled, open, aligned, home. Say it once, then let silence hold. Naming converts a fleeting state into a narrative signal your brain can store. Second, micro-embodiment sequencing. Stand up and run a gentle 3-part movement. Roll the shoulders, lengthen the spine, and allow the knees to soften in a single flow. Keep the eyes soft. Move with curiosity, not exertion. The biomechanical sequence creates a kinesthetic map that anchors the internal change into posture and muscle memory. Third, the breath flag. After an activation, practice a breathing anchor for 3 minutes. Inhale for 4 counts, hold 1 count, exhale for 6 counts. Do this 3 times a day for a week following any felt activation. The extended exhale habituates parasympathetic tone and gives the nervous system a reliable rhythm to align to. Fourth, social registration. Tell one trusted person in a short sentence what you noticed. I just felt some real settling. I'm noticing more clarity. This is not boasting, it is a strategic propagation. When another nervous system hears and mirrors your statement, it helps consolidate the coherence into the social field. Use sparingly. This is not about broadcasting it to everyone. Choose someone who will witness without over-interpreting. Fifth, microjournal. For 3 mornings after any real shift, write 2 lines about one decision that feels clearer and one physical sensation that remains. The act of writing gives the experience a temporal trace and assists the implicit memory to shift its baseline. Sixth, environmental anchor. Create one small object or place that holds the new tone. A stone, a scarf, a corner of a room. When you touch that object or sit in that corner, recall the activation. Use the anchor weekly until the pattern integrates. Seventh, soft service. Offer a small, practical help to someone within 48 hours of your activation. A message, a cup of coffee, an offered listening ear. Service amplifies transmissions because it moves frequency into a social axis of contribution rather than accumulation. Eighth, discernment buffer. After a shift, avoid major, irreversible decisions for at least a week unless you feel steady and certain. Integration is a process. Registration helps, but you deserve time to let the new attractor stabilize before you change legal or life structures. These rituals are designed to be minimal and effective. They are not magic spells. They are engineering choices that align physiology, attention, and social field so a received frequency can persist. Now let us walk through the 8 unmistakable post-completion outcomes with a clear example for each, so you can recognize how practical life can shift. Remember, these are outcomes, not promises. They are patterns observed across many people, described as consistently as possible without guaranteed timelines. Then oscillation ceases or diminishes dramatically. Example, where you previously moved between clarity and collapse on a weekly basis, you now find weeks where your baseline remains steady. Decisions you once revisited repeatedly retain their clarity. 2. Synchronicities culminate rather than stall. Example, opportunities you had tracked for months begin to align sequentially. Conversations, meetings, and timing conspire to produce a coherent pathway rather than scatter your attention. 3. Knowledge becomes embodied. Example, practices that used to feel theoretical, compassionate responses, non-reactive speech, mindful attention, begin to happen with less conscious effort, as though the body has learned the grammar of new behavior. 4. Energy patterns change from leak to flow. Example, instead of collapsing after a day of decision-making, you find your energy reservoir refilling more quickly. Sleep feels different in quality, and recovery between intense days becomes more reliable. 5. Relationship clarity increases. Example, a relationship that had been in limbo either shifts into an honest new phase or dissolves with less drama because the new you is calibrated to a clearer internal reference point. 6. Time becomes your ally, not your enemy. Example, projects you could not complete because timing felt off begin to reach fruition. Delays become meaningful stalls rather than endless grinding. 7. Presence affects others in a stabilizing way. Example, team meetings move faster, friends report feeling calmer around you, your interlocutors find decisions landing with less kick-off friction. 8. Waiting dissolves into arrival. Example, that persistent sense that you were about to becomes a sense that you have in key ways arrived. The map you carried feels activated, and movement through it gains momentum. Each outcome is accompanied by small, concrete shifts in day-to-day living. They are not always loud or spectacular. Often they are quietly massive. A relationship clarifies, a project moves forward, a habitual reactivity fails to trigger the old cascade. Pay attention to these quieter signatures. They are the real evidence. At this stage, you might be asking, how do you find proximity to a fully shifted field without naive vulnerability? How can you discern who genuinely holds alignment and who merely simulates it? This is crucial because proximity matters, but discernment protects you from chasing charisma. Here are practical guidelines. First, observe stabilization over spectacle. A coherent field is steady, ordinary, and calming. It reduces drama more than it creates it. If a person's presence leaves you unsettled or emotionally dependent, that is a red flag. True transmission tends toward settlement, not agitation. Second, test for humility. People who embody completion often have a low need for performance. They are less likely to insist you must follow them to be saved. The absence of urgency in their manner, paradoxically, can be the clearest sign. Third, watch for ethical consistency. Coherence shows in consistent boundaries, reliable behavior, and respect for others' autonomy. If the field you seek comes packaged with pressure, secrecy, or financial coercion, step back. Fourth, notice how they handle disagreement. A healthy field invites honest conversation and can absorb conflict without implosion. If the presence you reference punishes questioning, it is not a stabilizing transmission. Fifth, small proximity experiments. Spend short, intentional time near someone you sense may be coherent. A lunch, a walk, 10 minutes in a shared room, and witness what changes in your physiology or clarity. Use the micro-registration practices above immediately after contact. Name, breathe, note sensations. Over repeated short exposures, you will discern whether the presence has a durable organizing effect. Sixth, community triangulation. Seek reviews or accounts from people who have known the person for years. Patterns matter. One-off testimonials are less reliable than sustained reports of alignment. Seventh, prioritize embodiment over rhetoric. Someone who speaks beautifully about completion but shows chronic disorganization in their habits may be more eloquent than coherent. Look at their daily life. Do they sleep well, keep healthy boundaries, honor commitments? These are often more revealing than a stirring talk. Eighth, your body as litmus. Ultimately, your nervous system will tell you. After short exposures, does your breath find ease? Do intrusive thoughts dampen? If not, thank them internally and move gently away. Your system is not faulty if it does not resonate. It simply indicates a mismatch. Now, context and ethics. We are discussing phenomena that mingle subjective experience, social dynamics, and interpretive scientific metaphors. That mixture requires care. Transmission is not a license to bypass consent, to normalize coercion, or to commodify intimacy. Stewardship matters. If you are a receiver who discovers a durable alignment, ask yourself, how will I use it? Will it become a service, a weapon, a commerce? The most sustainable field-oriented work I have seen is grounded in humility and in practices that build autonomy, not dependency. If you are a potential transmitter, someone whose presence appears to stabilize others, practice restraint. Offer presence, not pressure. Encourage others to keep their agency. Teach registration practices rather than rituals that bind. Remember that a healthy field scales by enabling people, not by capturing them. Let's speak about acceleration and timing without slipping into scarcity rhetoric. There are moments where the collective field tilts and a window of receptivity widens. These windows appear periodically, sometimes tied to social shifts, sometimes to seasonal rhythms, sometimes to events that change the larger cultural frequency. This moment, in my observation, feels fertile, because many people have done the preparatory work and are more openly receptive. That said, windows are opportunities, not threats. If you do not land now, you will have other moments. The urgency here is practical encouragement. If you are ready, you will benefit from aligning your system to receive. If you are not ready, steady practice and patient waiting are honorable. Because the dynamics are social, your choices influence others. When you register honestly, when you comment, when you testify, when you share your process, you help stabilize the field for those around you. That is the morphic aspect I referenced earlier. But always balance public recognition with tender stewardship. Some aspects of completion are intimate and should be protected from transactionalization. Now, some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. Pitfall 1. Chasing confirmation. After a felt activation, It is easy to seek external proofs to soothe doubt. Resist the temptation to interpret every coincidence as evidence. Use your microjournal and watch for sustainable patterns over days and weeks, rather than instant validation. Pitfall 2. Premature evangelism. If you have just felt a shift, you might want to convince everyone. Hold the impulse. Integration benefits from time. Share with one trusted person rather than broadcasting to people who may not be ready. Pitfall 3. Mistaking charisma for coherence. Not everyone who moves people moves them toward alignment. Test for stability. Observe over time. Pitfall 4. Instrumentalizing others. Do not use relationships primarily as vehicles for your own advancement of coherence. Reciprocity matters. Transmission that amplifies requires mutual consent and care. Pitfall 5. Medicalizing metaphors. Be cautious in translating felt changes into biological claims. Speak about shifts as experiential reorganizations, not as guaranteed cellular rewiring. If you encounter significant health symptoms, consult qualified professionals. Let your subjective experience inform your curiosity, not your clinical treatment. Practical monthly integration plan. Suppose you have just felt a real settlement. Here is a simple, non-dogmatic 30-day scaffold to help you integrate without overcomplication. Week 1. Registration and gentle anchoring. Use the ground and name, micro-embodiment breath flag, and microjournal every day. Choose one environmental anchor and touch it daily. Week 2. Social calibration. Share with one trusted person each week and practice soft service gestures. Begin to notice relational shifts and journal changes in clarity. Week 3. Habit harmonization. Notice where your daily routines either support or pull against the new baseline. Make small changes. Adjust bedtime by 30 minutes. Simplify morning choices. Reduce one habitual urgency that draws you away from presence. Week 4. Skillful expansion. Re-engage with a project you've been avoiding and observe how decisions land differently. Keep the discernment buffer for major structural decisions. At the end of 30 days, review your microjournal and notice where coherence persisted. Use that data to set a 3-month integration intention, not a plan to force things, but a living contract with your new baseline. Community propagation. If you feel called to help others at their 87% threshold, consider facilitating small, consent-based gatherings rather than large events. Design experiences that prioritize witness, registration, and service. Teach the simple micro-rituals above. Model restraint. Encourage witnesses to document their own sensations. Foster a culture of mutual autonomy, not dependency. A few words about language. We use metaphors like quantum, coherence, and transmission because they provide useful maps. Yet those are maps, not the territory. You should feel free to translate these terms into whatever language helps your system make sense, neurological, energetic, mythic, or poetic. The practical tests remain the same. Does it stabilize your baseline? Does it aid clear decisions? Does it free your attention? If the answer is yes, the label matters less. Now, a fuller set of mini-stories to illustrate how completion can reconfigure ordinary life. These are composites, not claims about individuals, intended to give texture rather than promise replication. A teacher in her late 30s had been oscillating for years between bursts of effective leadership and weeks of exhaustion. After a modest proximity to a coherent field and modest registration practices, she found meetings that once took 3 sessions to clarify now resolved in 1. She did not become omnipotent, she simply stopped being her own congestion. A friend told her later that the tone of their classroom had changed, that students seemed to settle faster. She credited small changes in her posture and an improved rhythm in how she paced attention. A small business owner who had tracked endless promising leads reported that after a felt completion, the pattern of almosts resolved. Conversations that used to stall because of indecision became decisive. He did not suddenly attract windfalls. He simply found his timing had better traction. Cash flow improved as a byproduct of clearer choices, not as a direct guarantee from any mystical formula. A person in long limbo with a partner found that old reactive cycles softened. Conversations still required skillful listening, but less of them devolved into testing. Either the relationship moved forward with honesty, or it found a respectful separation that spared unnecessary drama. The shift did not erase old wounds. It changed the way they were tended. A creative collaborator discovered that time began to feel more generous. Projects that had been stalled for months found release because he could now sense proximate next steps and move without self-sabotage. He described the experience not as a sudden download of talent, but as a quieter translation of existing capacity into clearer output. In each case, the theme is the same. Existing potential becomes more serviceable through registration and field alignment. You are not being gifted new capacities ex nihilo. You are being reorganized so what is latent can operate with less friction. Let's close by naming some practical ways to steward your life after completion so that the shift deepens rather than diffuses. Cultivate daily micro-presence. 5 minutes in the morning where you place a hand on your heart and breathe with curiosity, not expectation, will slowly recondition your baseline. Protect your edges. A shift can make you generous. Make generosity safe by maintaining boundaries. Say no when you mean no. Say yes when you mean yes. Keep a small circle of honest witnesses. These are people who tell you truths that help you stay aligned. They are not cheerleaders. They are realists who care. Practice weekly registration. Take 1 moment each week to name what cohered that week. Gratitude alone is not the same as registration. Combine naming with concrete notes. This week, clarity arrived in X way. Never weaponize the state. Use your new stabilization for service, not dominance. The best transmissions I have seen multiply when their recipients act to enable others. Old humility. Completion is remembering, not mastery. It is a return to a center that is generous by nature. Allow that remembering to soften you rather than harden you into a new posture of certainty. If you are still reading, you are likely at an edge where recognition matters. Remember the single early action I invited. A simple public registration like the phrase "recognition complete" supports morphic propagation. If you felt moved earlier, you may have already used it. If not, it remains optional and not binding. Finally, reframe completion as remembrance. The last 13% is not a secret to hoard or an achievement to inflate your ego. It is the gentle unlocking of an internal architecture that was always present. You did not fail if it stalled. You were prepared by your long practices to receive. The transmission is not a goal to stamp with your name. It is a reclaiming of an alignment that makes choices clearer, time more generous, and presence more luminous. If this message landed and you felt resonance, take one small, generous next step. Subscribe to receive future transmissions and resources that support integration, and share this with one person you sense is at their 87% threshold. Someone who might benefit from a gentle nudge into reception. Sharing is not coercion. It's an act of service that can strengthen the field for others. You have done the work. You have come to the edge. The hidden key is recognition, registration, and humble proximity. If you choose to receive, do so with tenderness and discernment. Completion is the opening of a doorway you have been walking toward. Entering it is remembering, not earning.